My name is Yale Webster. I'm 45 years old, and I have spent the last 2 decades at Phoenix Technologies as the senior platform engineer. When I joined the company right out of graduate school, it was a modest startup with a handful of employees, but I quickly took on the responsibility of architecting what would become our flagship system, the Phoenix platform. Over the years, I have led multiple engineering teams, shepherded countless product cycles, and consistently delivered results that ensured our platform remained scalable, reliable, and ahead of the curve. What sets me apart isn't just the code I wrote or the systems I designed. It's my approach. I'm known here for my methodical nature and unwavering reliability. Every system change I've implemented is meticulously documented. Not just the high-level architecture, but the intricate dependencies, configurations, security protocols, and backup procedures. I maintain redundant backups, encrypted archives, and detailed logs that allow anyone with the right credentials to understand the platform's inner workings. This discipline has earned trust from management, engineering, and clients alike. It's a practice born from years of experience and a recognition that complex systems demand more than just technical skill. They require foresight and accountability. That's why last Tuesday's phone call hit like a shockwave through my routine. It was Caleb Hunt, our procurement manager, known within the company for his laser focus on cost-cutting and efficiency metrics. The call came at 7 a.m., early enough that I was still reviewing some code commits and finalizing a technical proposal. I answered professionally, expecting the usual updates or scheduling questions. Instead, Caleb delivered his message bluntly. "Your compensation package is out of range, Yale. Procurement's decided we can staff 3 junior engineers for less than your salary, so we're moving forward with that plan." There was no room for discussion in his tone, no preamble, just a cold economic calculation disguised as corporate strategy. I paused, processing the information carefully. Caleb's words were clear, but the implications were far-reaching. After 20 years of steering engineering and building what had become the backbone of Phoenix Technologies, I was being replaced, not for performance reasons or lack of skill, but purely as a cost-cutting measure. Despite the weight of that reality, I maintained my composure. I thanked Caleb for the transparency, shook his hand firmly during the in-person meeting that followed later that day, and quietly prepared to clear my bench of Phoenix prototypes. There was no need for an outburst or dramatic protest. I understood that this was a professional crossroads, not a personal slight to be met with anger. Inside, though, my mind was already calculating the next steps. Years of experience had taught me that such moments, while difficult, are also opportunities. I began mentally reviewing all the documentation I had compiled over the years, the architecture blueprints, system dependencies, contractual agreements, and security protocols. I knew that the value I brought was not limited to my daily output, but was embedded in the intellectual property and operational continuity of the platform. As I meticulously boxed up my prototypes and archived files, I silently mapped out the path forward. No hasty reactions, no emotional outbursts, only calm, logical planning. This was not the end of my story at Phoenix Technologies. It was the beginning of a carefully orchestrated response that would leverage my professionalism, knowledge, and legal rights. That morning's call didn't just mark my termination. It ignited a strategic process that would unfold quietly but decisively. I was about to transform a corporate cost-cutting maneuver into a case study in measured, systematic justice. And it all began with that firm handshake and the silent clearing of my bench. Over more than 2 decades, I dedicated myself to building Phoenix Technologies' core platform, a system that has since evolved into the company's primary revenue engine. Today, that platform generates approximately $85 million annually and supports a user base exceeding 4 million people worldwide. It's a complex distributed system, one that integrates real-time data processing, scalable microservices, and robust security frameworks. The architecture I designed prioritized modularity and resilience, allowing continuous deployment without significant downtime, even as user demand doubled year after year. When I first joined Phoenix Technologies fresh out of graduate school, the platform was little more than a minimal viable product running on a handful of servers. I was quickly entrusted with leading a small team to scale it, and over time, I assumed full ownership of the platform's architecture. Under my leadership, the engineering team grew from 3 to 15 members, each specializing in critical subcomponents, database management, API security, cloud infrastructure, and front-end integration. One of my proudest achievements was spearheading a series of efficiency improvements that collectively saved the company over $3.2 million annually. These weren't just cost-cutting measures. They were technical optimizations, streamlining data queries, automating deployment pipelines, and refactoring legacy code to improve performance and reduce server load. I authored comprehensive architecture blueprints and system design documents that became standard references across engineering departments. These documents detailed everything from system flowcharts and error handling procedures to legacy code deprecation schedules and API versioning protocols. Beyond technical leadership, I worked closely with cross-functional teams, product managers, cybersecurity experts, and compliance officers to ensure that our platform met evolving regulatory standards and client expectations. I implemented rigorous daily documentation protocols, mandating that each code commit be accompanied by descriptive comments, testing results, and impact assessments. This culture of documentation ensured that knowledge was distributed and the platform was maintainable, even when individual engineers rotated off the project. To safeguard operational continuity, I maintained multiple redundant backups stored in encrypted archives across geographically dispersed data centers. These backups were tested regularly through disaster recovery drills I organized, guaranteeing minimal disruptions in case of system failures. My documentation included detailed recovery runbooks and configuration management records that allowed any authorized engineer to restore services swiftly. This meticulous approach wasn't just a personal preference, it was a professional necessity, given the platform's complexity and criticality. I earned a reputation within Phoenix for being the go-to person when urgent issues arose, a reliability that earned the trust of stakeholders throughout the organization. Over the years, my contributions were recognized with 5 promotions, each reflecting expanded responsibility and technical leadership. My compensation reflected this value. In addition to a competitive salary, I accumulated $450,000 in vested stock options, part of an employee equity plan designed to reward long-term commitment and performance. These options were not merely financial incentives, but also a symbolic acknowledgement of my integral role in Phoenix's success. Ironically, this very value made me a target during the recent procurement-driven restructuring. Caleb Hunt's proposal to replace me with 3 junior engineers, whose combined salaries would total roughly $140,000 annually, ignored the operational risks and institutional knowledge embedded in my tenure. The assumption was that 3 less expensive juniors could collectively replicate my output, failing to account for the steep learning curve, coordination overhead, and latent system dependencies only I fully understood. This cost-driven calculus was dangerously short-sighted. I knew that no amount of hiring could instantly compensate for 2 decades of experience condensed into a single, meticulously maintained platform. The Phoenix system's complexity and the intricate web of undocumented tribal knowledge required far more than just raw labor hours. It demanded a strategic, institutional understanding, one that could not be casually dismissed or scaled down without jeopardizing the entire platform's stability. As I reflected on this, I recognized that my years of diligent documentation, architectural foresight, and operational stewardship were not just personal achievements. They represented a reservoir of irreplaceable intellectual property and organizational capital. These assets positioned me uniquely, not only as a former employee but as a professional with substantial leverage in any dispute. Thus, while Caleb's cost-cutting perspective reduced my tenure to a line item on a budget spreadsheet, I saw it as the opening move in a much larger professional negotiation. I was no longer just an engineer displaced by economics. I was an architect of a critical infrastructure, with documented rights, contractual protections, and a professional reputation to defend. In that moment, my extensive background and the tangible value I generated crystallized into the foundation for a systematic response, one grounded in precision, documentation, and strategic leverage. I knew that if I played my cards right, the years of professional investment embedded in my work would not be discarded, but would instead serve as the cornerstone of a comprehensive case to reclaim my rightful position or secure fair recompense. The platform I built was more than a system. It was a testament to professional rigor and strategic engineering. And despite this abrupt career disruption, I was prepared to leverage every bite of that legacy in the fight ahead. Caleb Hunt had always been a figure of calculated efficiency within Phoenix Technologies. As the procurement manager, his mandate was clear: reduce operational costs and streamline expenditures wherever possible. Lately, the pressure on him had escalated dramatically. An imposed target to cut $1.2 million annually from headcount and associated expenses. His strategy focused on numbers and bottom lines, often detached from the nuanced realities of technical operations. When my termination came up in his cost-cutting checklist, he saw only a dollar sign. My annual compensation package exceeded the combined salaries of 3 junior engineers he planned to onboard instead. His proposal was deceptively straightforward. By replacing me with 3 less experienced engineers, earning approximately $140,000 collectively, the company would ostensibly save hundreds of thousands of dollars each year. Caleb presented this plan as a strategic win, less spending for the same output, or so he presumed. However, what he failed to acknowledge was the intrinsic value woven into my role, the proprietary knowledge, the extensive institutional memory, and the exclusive operational control I held over the Phoenix platform. The complexity of this system was not something junior hires could simply inherit without risk or ramp-up time. What made Caleb's approach dangerously flawed was his neglect of critical contractual and technical constraints. I was more than just an employee with a salary. I was bound by an employment contract that included significant severance obligations and stock vesting schedules, elements that Caleb's plan conspicuously ignored. The $450,000 invested stock options I had accrued was a substantial financial asset tied directly to my tenure and performance. His proposal to dismiss these vested rights was not only ethically questionable, but legally precarious. Moreover, Caleb overlooked the non-compete clause embedded within my severance agreement, a clause that effectively shielded the company from immediate competition while compensating me fairly upon departure. This clause was a pivotal lever, legally restricting my capacity to work for direct competitors for a defined period unless severance terms were honored. Ignoring this in his cost-cutting calculations exposed the company to potential breach of contract claims. From a technical standpoint, Caleb's plan showed remarkable ignorance of the intellectual property and operational dependencies tied to my role. I held exclusive access to critical system passwords, encryption keys, and back-end administrative controls, keys to the kingdom that no junior engineer had clearance or understanding of. The Phoenix platform was not simply software. It was an evolving ecosystem, governed by layered security protocols and compliance requirements, many of which mandated my active involvement in any knowledge transfer or system modification. This knowledge wasn't trivial. It was deeply interwoven with regulatory compliance frameworks governing data protection, user privacy, and intellectual property rights. Attempting to transfer control of the platform's IP without my involvement risked triggering regulatory infractions, potentially exposing the company to fines or sanctions. Caleb's disregard for these complex legal and compliance issues was telling. It suggested a reliance on procurement's budgetary objectives over operational reality. Compounding these oversights, Caleb had secured the backing of Marvin Dalton, the company's corporate counsel. Marvin, while competent, appeared detached from the full scope of technical and contractual nuances. His endorsement of Caleb's cost-cutting plan seemed more procedural than substantively informed. He failed to fully scrutinize the embedded contractual clauses, the intricate intellectual property protections, or the operational risks of removing a pivotal engineer without a comprehensive transition. This legal endorsement essentially gave Caleb a green light to proceed, unwittingly exposing the company to multiple vulnerabilities. During this period, I engaged Elliot Marks, an employment lawyer specializing in wrongful termination and corporate disputes. Elliot's expertise was instrumental in dissecting the layers of Caleb's plan. exposing the miscalculations and contractual breaches. With Elliot's counsel, I began assembling the framework to contest the termination rigorously. We analyzed the employment contract's fine print, especially the severance provisions, stock vesting clauses, and non-compete obligations. Elliot also highlighted the regulatory risks associated with abrupt intellectual property handover without proper procedural adherence. Simultaneously, Elliot emphasized the operational peril posed by replacing me with less experienced juniors. From a legal standpoint, this demonstrated willful neglect on the company's part, as they knowingly endangered the platform's stability and client deliverables. This neglect could bolster claims of breach of fiduciary duty and negligence. Together, we mapped out a comprehensive approach that integrated legal, technical, and strategic dimensions to counteract the reckless cost-cutting maneuver. While Caleb's focus remained fixated on immediate budget reductions, his plan was riddled with critical oversights, both legal and operational. He failed to appreciate that my role entailed far more than salary expense. It encompassed irreplaceable intellectual property, contractual rights, regulatory protections, and strategic knowledge critical to Phoenix Technologies' ongoing success. Ignoring these elements was not merely short-sighted. It opened the door to a systematic professional response grounded in documented rights and strategic leverage. As I processed these realizations, I understood the stakes clearly. Caleb's push for termination was not just a personal affront, but a calculated business gamble fraught with legal, technical, and reputational risks. With the right evidence and counsel, these vulnerabilities could be leveraged decisively. The cost-saving narrative he championed was fundamentally flawed and ripe for challenge. My internal strategy crystallized to exploit the corporate blind spots in Caleb's plan, his underestimation of contractual protections, intellectual property rights, and regulatory compliance to build a robust, methodical case. This meant gathering exhaustive documentation, engaging legal expertise, and preparing to hold the company accountable for its reckless disregard of established professional and legal standards. In the end, Caleb's cost-cutting ambition was a miscalculation, one that failed to account for the very systems, legal, technical, and operational, that I had meticulously built and maintained. This oversight would prove pivotal, setting the stage for a professional reckoning that leveraged patience, evidence, and strategic action over impulsive retaliation. After the initial shock of my termination settled, my first priority was to conduct an exhaustive review of the official documentation Phoenix Technologies had sent me. I obtained my termination notice, employment contract, severance agreement, and internal communications related to my departure. I approached this task with the same rigor I applied to my engineering work: methodical, detail-oriented, and strategic. It was clear from the outset that several critical obligations had been overlooked or outright ignored. First, the severance provisions stipulated clearly in my contract were conspicuously absent from the termination package. According to the terms negotiated and signed years ago, my severance was calculated based on my tenure and compensation level, including guaranteed payout clauses triggered in cases of involuntary termination without cause. Yet, the document I received offered no such severance compensation. This omission was a red flag signaling a potential breach of contract, something no experienced professional could take lightly. Next, I turned my attention to my vested stock options, which represented approximately $450,000 in value. The equity plan was an integral part of my total compensation and a reward for long-term contribution and performance. According to the vesting schedule embedded in my contract and the equity plan documents, all options already vested at the time of my termination were to be honored and exercisable within a specified window. However, the company's formal communication failed to recognize or acknowledge this entitlement. No instructions, timelines, or access to exercise these options were provided. This signaled either gross negligence or a deliberate attempt to withhold substantial financial rights. To understand how Phoenix personnel planned to manage this, I conducted a parallel review of internal emails I obtained through informal channels and colleagues who remained at the company. These emails confirmed Caleb Hunt's initiative to replace me with 3 junior engineers whose combined annual salaries totaled roughly $140,000, a fraction of my compensation. The correspondence revealed not only budgetary calculations, but a dismissive attitude toward the operational risks associated with my abrupt removal. More troubling was the discovery of emails discussing intellectual property, IP rights, and system access. My employment contract contained explicit clauses protecting my proprietary contributions to the Phoenix platform and asserting that any transfer or usage of this IP post-termination required my consent or proper assignment procedures. These clauses were not addressed in the termination documents. Instead, the internal communications suggested an intent to bypass these protections, transferring control of critical IP to new hires without involving me or following due process. Equally concerning was the non-compete clause embedded in my severance agreement. This clause effectively prevented me from joining or consulting with direct competitors for a specified period, contingent on receiving agreed severance benefits. Without honoring severance, the company's action nullified their own protections against competitive leakage. From a legal standpoint, this created a paradox. They terminated me to save costs but simultaneously exposed themselves to potential competitive harm if I contested the severance terms or chose to work elsewhere immediately. Simultaneously, I mapped out the technical dependencies tied exclusively to my role. Phoenix's platform architecture was a labyrinth of interlinked modules, security frameworks, and proprietary algorithms. I was the sole custodian of several high-level administrative passwords, encryption keys, and recovery protocols, not documented elsewhere for security reasons. This exclusive access was not a vulnerability, but a measured safeguard essential to platform integrity and compliance with regulatory standards. I knew that any attempt to transfer IP control or operational responsibility without my involvement risked violating data protection laws, intellectual property regulations, and contractual obligations. The emails revealed that Caleb and his team underestimated these compliance risks, focusing narrowly on the financial bottom line. This ignorance implied the company could face regulatory investigations or penalties if these procedures were mishandled. Throughout this investigative phase, I maintained a deliberate professional detachment. I catalogued every document, email, and contractual clause with precision, annotating inconsistencies and breaches. I created a secure digital archive, cross-referencing all elements to build a coherent picture of the company's oversights and unlawful actions. This process was not reactive. It was a strategic assessment designed to identify the company's weak points and potential leverage for the dispute ahead. Rather than allowing frustration or anger to cloud my judgment, I focused on facts and evidence. My approach was to transform these discoveries into a systematic framework that could underpin legal action and professional negotiation. I understood that the company's failure to honor severance, vest my equity rights, and respect IP protections were not just procedural errors, they were material breaches that could substantially strengthen my position. In parallel, I began compiling technical documentation demonstrating how operational continuity depended on my involvement. I detailed system modules whose stability and security hinged on my exclusive knowledge and access. This technical evidence would later support claims that unilateral termination without due transition endangered the company's core business operations. By the end of this initial discovery phase, I had a clear professional assessment. Phoenix Technologies had bypassed fundamental contractual and legal obligations, ignoring vested financial rights and intellectual property protections, while underestimating the operational risks tied to my removal. These lapses were not merely oversights, they were vulnerabilities that could be systematically exposed and leveraged. This comprehensive understanding became the foundation for the next phase of my response. I was no longer simply the engineer who had been fired. I was a professional armed with documented proof of breach and a methodical plan to assert my rights. The strategic evaluation of these weaknesses revealed not only a path to reclaiming what was due, but also an opportunity to hold the company accountable for its reckless decisions. In short, no emotional reaction, only a calculated professional assessment and preparation. The groundwork was set. The company had made critical missteps. Now, it was time to move forward with precision and resolve. Following my thorough assessment of the termination documents, contracts, and internal communications, I recognized the need to enlist expert legal counsel to navigate the complex intersection of employment law, intellectual property rights, and regulatory compliance. I scheduled a consultation with Elliot Marks, an employment lawyer with a solid reputation for handling wrongful termination cases in the tech sector. Elliot's analytical rigor and experience with contract disputes promised to complement my detailed documentation and technical expertise perfectly. Our first meeting was conducted with clear professional focus. I presented Elliot with the comprehensive timeline I had constructed, from the initial 7 a.m. call by Caleb Hunt, through the formal termination notices, to the internal emails revealing the procurement-driven cost-cutting strategy. We meticulously organized these events chronologically, highlighting key contractual deadlines and procedural breaches. This timeline served as a foundational tool, allowing Elliot to visualize the sequence of decisions and identify legal violations inherent in the company's actions. Simultaneously, I handed over digital copies of all relevant documents: my original employment contract, severance agreement, stock option plans, internal email threads, and the architectural blueprints of the Phoenix platform. Elliot carefully examined each document, cross-referencing contractual clauses with the company's termination actions and procurement correspondence. He paid particular attention to the non-compete clause tied to severance terms, the equity vesting schedule, and the IP assignment provisions, areas I had flagged as critical leverage points. Understanding the technical complexity of Phoenix's platform was essential for Elliot to frame legal arguments around operational risk and fiduciary duty. I provided detailed system architecture diagrams, highlighting modules and security controls exclusively managed by me. We discussed how sudden removal without proper transition could jeopardize platform stability, potentially breaching client service agreements and triggering regulatory scrutiny. Elliot noted these technical details would be vital in demonstrating willful neglect by the company's leadership. To strengthen our case further, I began collecting witness statements from trusted colleagues still at Phoenix Technologies. These statements confirmed my indispensable role in maintaining system integrity and underscored the impracticality of replacing me with less experienced juniors without substantial risk. Elliot emphasized that these testimonies would corroborate our claims of operational jeopardy and managerial oversight failure. Together, Elliot and I developed a strategic evidence matrix, categorizing documents, emails, witness accounts, and technical blueprints according to the legal claims we intended to pursue: breach of contract for severance denial, violation of equity rights, unlawful IP transfer attempts, and neglect of regulatory compliance obligations. This matrix allowed us to track evidentiary support for each claim methodically and ensure no aspect of the company's misconduct was overlooked. Recognizing Caleb Hunt's apparent ignorance of these contractual and technical details, our strategy hinged on exposing this in court and regulatory filings. We planned to demonstrate that Phoenix Technologies, under Caleb's directive and corporate counsel Marvin Dalton's endorsement, proceeded with reckless disregard for binding agreements and operational realities. This would establish a pattern of willful breach and negligence, increasing pressure for a favorable settlement or judgment. We also prepared for potential counters by the company, such as claims of performance issues or restructuring necessity. To preempt this, I organized performance reviews, project evaluations, and client feedback reports that unequivocally affirmed my competence and contributions. Additionally, Elliot advised on preserving all electronic communications moving forward, ensuring that any future contacts from Caleb or other executives were documented and handled professionally through legal channels. Throughout this phase, I maintained professional discipline, treating each step as a project with measurable objectives and deliverables. The consultation with Elliot was not merely legal advice. It was a collaborative strategic planning session, aligning legal theory with technical facts and business context. This joint approach ensured our case would be comprehensive, fact-based, and difficult to refute. In parallel, I secured backups of all system access credentials and technical archives, ensuring these remained intact and verifiable. This would be crucial in any disputes over intellectual property rights or operational control. I also initiated conversations with IT security and compliance experts to validate the regulatory frameworks involved adding another layer of authoritative support to our claims. By the end of this planning phase, I had transformed from a displaced engineer into a methodical litigant, equipped with a robust legal and professional case. The path ahead was clear: leverage contractual protections, technical evidence and regulatory oversight to challenge the company's wrongful termination and cost-cutting gambit. The groundwork was laid meticulously, each document, statement and blueprint a building block, in a case designed to hold Phoenix Technologies accountable and protect my professional legacy. Elliot Marks took immediate and thorough action once I entrusted him with the full scope of documentation I had meticulously compiled. His review of my employment contract was nothing short of exhaustive. Every clause, every paragraph was scrutinized with legal precision, and it quickly became clear that Phoenix Technologies' termination of my employment was fraught with multiple breaches of contract and statutory obligations. First and foremost, Elliot highlighted the glaring failure to honor the severance provisions explicitly set forth in my contract. According to our agreement, termination without cause mandated a severance package commensurate with my tenure and compensation level, including a substantial payout to provide financial stability during the transition. Yet the company had proceeded without triggering any severance payments. This omission, Elliot explained, was a straightforward breach of contract, something that significantly strengthened our position in any potential legal proceedings. Next came the issue of my vested stock options, a critical part of my total compensation package. Elliot noted that the company's unilateral disregard for these vested options, amounting to $450,000 in value, constituted another serious violation. The equity plan documents clearly described the vesting schedule and the rights I held to exercise my options within a defined post-termination window. Yet Phoenix's termination letter made no mention of these rights, nor did it provide instructions or mechanisms to exercise the options. Elliot stressed that withholding or ignoring vested equity was a common point of contention in wrongful termination cases and could result in punitive damages if challenged successfully. Beyond financial considerations, Elliot's review extended into the realm of intellectual property rights and operational control. My employment contract contained detailed clauses protecting my proprietary inventions, proprietary system designs, and the Phoenix platform's architected innovations. These clauses mandated that any transfer or use of these intellectual assets post-termination required my formal consent or a proper legal assignment process. As Elliot pointed out, Phoenix's attempt to proceed with an abrupt replacement strategy, effectively transferring IP control to junior engineers without my involvement, was a blatant neglect of these contractual protections. This was not merely a breach of contract, but potentially a violation of intellectual property law and regulatory compliance standards. To bolster these legal claims, I provided Elliot with extensive technical documentation, including system architecture blueprints, dependency charts, and encrypted backups. These documents demonstrated the critical operational roles I held, roles that could not be effectively replicated or delegated without risking platform stability. Elliot recognized this as a key factor in framing our case. The company had knowingly exposed itself to operational and reputational risk by eliminating my position without a proper transition or knowledge transfer. Elliot also examined the email correspondence I had collected, which unearthed Caleb Hunt's direct awareness of these risks. The internal communications showed Caleb's knowledge of the complex dependencies and the potential consequences of replacing me with junior hires. Despite this, he advanced the cost-cutting plan, willfully neglecting the contractual and operational safeguards in place. Elliot emphasized that this demonstrated a degree of recklessness and potentially constituted a breach of fiduciary duty by management. An especially critical legal lever emerged around the non-compete clause embedded in my severance agreement. This clause was designed to protect Phoenix Technologies from immediate competition by me for a defined time frame, provided that severance terms were honored. Elliot explained that by ignoring severance obligations, the company had effectively nullified this clause, leaving themselves exposed to potential competitive risks if I chose to engage with a rival firm prematurely. This paradox undermined their entire justification for the cost-saving measure and added a nuanced dimension to our legal strategy. To further solidify our case, Elliott engaged with regulatory compliance experts to assess the risks tied to the attempted intellectual property transfer and access control changes. Their analysis confirmed that bypassing proper legal channels and security protocols not only violated contractual agreements, but also exposed Phoenix Technologies to potential sanctions under data protection and IP laws. This regulatory risk added urgency and gravity to our legal posture. Throughout this phase, Elliott worked diligently to align the technical complexities with clear legal principles. We developed a matrix linking each breach, severance denial, stock option disregard, IP transfer violations, and regulatory compliance failures to corresponding legal claims such as breach of contract, breach of fiduciary duty, and statutory violations. This systematic approach ensured no detail was overlooked and created a compelling narrative of corporate neglect and professional injustice. Simultaneously, I began gathering and organizing witness statements from colleagues who confirmed my unique contributions and the improbability of my immediate replacement without significant disruption. These testimonies would serve to corroborate claims of operational risk and managerial recklessness, reinforcing our argument that the termination was not only legally flawed, but strategically unsound. Elliott advised me on preserving all future communications and instructed me to remain professional and non-confrontational in any interactions with Phoenix Technologies. He emphasized that each documented exchange would serve as evidence, and that maintaining composure was key to a credible and effective legal campaign. In essence, this phase transformed my initial professional setback into a comprehensive and strategically layered legal case. Elliott's meticulous analysis of my employment contract, combined with the extensive technical evidence and internal communications, revealed a pattern of breaches and oversights by Phoenix Technologies that extended far beyond a simple termination. They had failed to respect contractual obligations, ignored vested financial rights, and endangered the platform's integrity by sidelining the indispensable architect. This methodical legal groundwork laid the foundation for the ensuing actions, legal filings, regulatory complaints, and professional negotiations that would methodically expose the company's vulnerabilities and protect my professional and financial interests. The complexity of the case demanded both legal precision and technical insight, and with Elliott's expertise, I was confident in our capacity to hold Phoenix Technologies accountable. Serving formal legal notices to Caleb Hunt and corporate counsel Marvin Dalton was the first deliberate step in turning my strategic plan into actionable pressure. After Elliott and I finalized the documentation matrix and framed clear legal claims, we drafted detailed demand letters outlining the company's breaches: failure to pay severance, denial of vested stock options, unauthorized attempts to transfer intellectual property, and violation of non-compete protections. These letters were sent via certified mail and electronic delivery, ensuring an official paper trail. Each notice specified a timeline for response and outlined potential legal consequences if the company failed to remedy these violations. Simultaneously, Elliott filed formal complaints with the State Labor Board to initiate regulatory scrutiny of Phoenix Technologies' conduct. The complaints cited clear violations of employment laws, specifically wrongful termination without severance, withholding of vested equity rights, and lack of adherence to contractual obligations. We also flagged the company's mishandling of intellectual property transfers and non-compete breaches, areas less commonly pursued in labor board cases, but crucial for comprehensive accountability. These filings triggered preliminary investigations, requiring Phoenix to respond officially, increasing pressure from outside the company's internal legal counsel. Recognizing the operational risks tied to my abrupt removal, I took the additional professional step of alerting key clients who relied heavily on the Phoenix platform. I drafted measured, factual communications, carefully avoiding confrontational language, that outlined potential service continuity risks stemming from the sudden replacement of the platform's sole architect without an adequate transition. The goal wasn't to cause panic, but to ensure transparency and prepare clients for possible disruptions linked to the company's restructuring. This move subtly leveraged client influence, as any service instability would reflect directly on Phoenix's reputation and revenue streams. Throughout these initial actions, I maintained strict professionalism in all communications. Every letter, email, and phone call was carefully logged and backed up in encrypted archives. Elliot advised that documentation of these interactions would be critical to demonstrate my good faith efforts and the company's ongoing disregard or failure to act. For example, when Caleb replied with vague assurances or deflected responsibility, I responded courteously but firmly, reiterating that all further inquiries be directed through legal counsel. This preserved my position and prevented any statements that could be misconstrued or weaken our case. Meanwhile, Caleb and his team pressed ahead with onboarding the 3 junior engineers, seemingly unaware or unconcerned about the legal storm accumulating behind the scenes. I observed their training sessions and system handoffs through contacts within the engineering department, noting early signs of operational friction and knowledge gaps. These observations reinforced the validity of our claims regarding the impracticality and riskiness of the replacement strategy. In parallel, I finalized financial protections related to my vested stock options. Through coordination with Elliot, we arranged for a court-ordered escrow of the disputed shares, ensuring that neither Phoenix Technologies nor Caleb could unilaterally dispose of or devalue these assets during ongoing negotiations. This legal escrow served as a safeguard against asset dissipation and demonstrated the seriousness of our financial claims. Another critical leverage point involved the non-compete clause embedded in my severance agreement. Since the company had terminated severance payments, the enforcement of that clause became legally ambiguous. I initiated discussions through Elliot about potential negotiations for either enforcement or waiver of the non-compete, positioning this as a strategic bargaining chip. This added a nuanced layer to the dispute, forcing the company to weigh the risks of an unenforceable non-compete against the need to resolve severance obligations and IP controls. By the end of this phase, the trap was quietly set. A network of legal notices, regulatory complaints, client alerts, financial safeguards, and negotiation postures positioned to systematically expose Phoenix Technologies' breaches and compel a measured corporate response. All the while, I preserved an image of professional calm and detached control, aware that any misstep could undermine the carefully constructed case. The company's leadership faced a complex dilemma. Pressing forward with cost-cutting and ignoring contractual obligations risked legal repercussions and operational failures. Conceding to my claims could mean substantial financial payouts and a reputational blow. This dynamic tension set the stage for the unfolding confrontation, not with loud protest or emotional confrontation, but with precise, methodical pressure, backed by facts, contracts, and documented rights. In my mind, the ongoing quiet escalation was a testament to the power of strategic patience and professional discipline. Rather than reacting impulsively, I had transformed the initial betrayal into a calculated campaign, leveraging the very structures and systems I had helped build. The early stages of consequence management were underway, but the real challenge, forcing meaningful accountability and securing justice, was still ahead. System failures began emerging within weeks of my departure, validating the concerns Elliot and I had identified during our case preparation. The Phoenix platform, with its intricate architecture and critical dependencies, was proving far too complex for the newly onboarded junior engineers to manage effectively. Despite their technical aptitude, their limited institutional knowledge and lack of exposure to the platform's nuanced operational intricacies triggered cascading issues that rapidly affected end users. I tracked these developments carefully through multiple channels. Internal reports flagged increased incident tickets related to service latency, unexpected downtime, and sporadic data synchronization errors. These problems, initially sporadic, intensified into recurring outages that drew urgent complaints from key clients, many of whom depended heavily on the platform's stability for their own business operations. I maintained a discreet but systematic log of these performance degradation reports, correlating them with the documented system modules and dependencies only I had managed. This data was invaluable, as it demonstrated the operational risk of my abrupt replacement beyond mere hypothesis. At the same time, regulatory bodies acknowledged receipt of complaints we had filed regarding labor violations and intellectual property misuse. the State Labor Board initiated a preliminary investigation into Phoenix Technologies' termination practices, focusing on the absence of severance payments and the improper handling of vested stock options. Concurrently, the Intellectual Property Oversight Agency reviewed the company's apparent attempts to reassign proprietary rights and critical system access without proper authorization or my involvement. These regulatory activities added a formal layer of scrutiny that extended beyond internal corporate politics and into potential legal penalties. Caleb Hunt's behavior during this period reflected growing desperation. His initial confidence eroded as operational issues mounted and external investigations loomed. I documented each of his increasingly frequent calls, most arriving early morning or late evening, where he pleaded for consulting assistance to stabilize the platform. On several occasions, he offered substantial consulting fees, attempting to negotiate informal arrangements that might mitigate the damage without acknowledging the underlying contractual breaches. I responded uniformly and professionally. All further communication was routed through Elliot Marks, my attorney. I declined direct involvement in technical troubleshooting or transition support, preserving the clear legal boundary between my role as former employee and the company's obligation to maintain operational continuity. Each refusal was carefully documented in emails and recorded call logs, creating a robust evidentiary chain. Meanwhile, I monitored feedback from contacts still embedded within the engineering teams. They reported mounting frustration with the juniors' inexperience, managing high-priority incidents, and the lack of institutional knowledge transfer that could have alleviated the learning curve. System vulnerabilities, previously mitigated through my architectural foresight and real-time interventions, began surfacing unaddressed. This operational instability had tangible consequences. Client satisfaction scores dipped, contract renewal discussions were delayed, and internal morale among the remaining technical staff faltered. The weight of these failures was not lost on senior management. Although publicly maintaining a stance supportive of the cost-cutting measures, behind closed doors, there was growing concern that the procurement-driven decision to replace a single seasoned architect with multiple juniors was backfiring. Yet, no immediate corrective steps were taken, likely due to the increasing legal and regulatory pressure that made reversing course complicated without admitting fault. Throughout this period, I maintained strategic detachment. I refrained from public commentary or direct confrontation. Instead, I focused on preserving and expanding the documentary record. I encrypted and securely archived all incoming operational reports, client complaints, regulatory correspondence, and communications from Caleb. Each piece of evidence reinforced the narrative that the company's reckless cost-saving gambit had precipitated measurable operational degradation and legal exposure. This phase marked a critical turning point. The juniors' struggles and resulting system failures provided concrete proof that the Phoenix platform's stability was inherently linked to the expertise, knowledge, and access I had provided. The regulatory investigations and labor board inquiries gave formal recognition to the contractual and statutory violations we alleged. Caleb's overtures for consulting fees underscored his acknowledgement, albeit tacit, that the company's unilateral termination had created a knowledge gap they were ill-equipped to fill. By maintaining composure and methodical documentation, I ensured that these developments would directly strengthen our legal position. The operational disruptions and regulatory scrutiny transformed abstract contractual breaches into tangible consequences, increasing the company's liability and strategic vulnerability. Yet, despite this mounting pressure, the company's leadership remained publicly silent, setting the stage for the escalation that would follow. In essence, while Caleb and Phoenix Technologies tried to move forward as if nothing had changed, the foundational stability of their flagship platform was unraveling. The failures were not mere technical glitches, but symptoms of a deeper failure to respect the professional and legal frameworks that underpin complex system stewardship. I observed all this with professional resolve, knowing that these events were reinforcing the strategic case Elliot and I had built, one grounded in facts, evidence, and the inescapable realities of operational risk and contractual accountability. Simultaneous legal actions escalated rapidly, as Elliott filed a formal wrongful termination lawsuit on my behalf, supported by exhaustive documentation that meticulously linked every breach of contract to damaging operational consequences. The complaint outlined how Phoenix Technologies had willfully disregarded severance obligations, denied my vested stock options worth $450,000, and attempted an unauthorized transfer of valuable intellectual property without my consent. Each claim was substantiated with detailed evidence, contract excerpts, internal email threads revealing management's intent, and technical diagrams demonstrating the critical dependencies I had exclusively managed. While the lawsuit formally initiated in court, regulatory agencies intensified their scrutiny. The State Labor Board expanded its investigation beyond the initial complaints, probing Phoenix Technologies for multiple labor law violations related to wrongful termination procedures and equity rights mishandling. Simultaneously, the Intellectual Property Oversight Unit launched a parallel inquiry focusing on the unauthorized transfer and usage of proprietary system assets. These agencies requested detailed submissions from Phoenix's legal team and began interviewing departmental stakeholders to assess compliance failures. On the operational front, the repercussions of my departure became unmistakably severe. The junior engineers, despite their best efforts, struggled to manage the platform's intricate architecture. Their unfamiliarity with latent system interdependencies led to cascading failures, intermittent outages, data synchronization errors, and compromised security patches that directly impacted client services. Incident reports multiplied, and key clients communicated their concerns to Phoenix's executive leadership. The growing instability reflected the void left by my absence and underscored the practical risk of underestimating institutional knowledge. Caleb Hunt's confidence visibly deteriorated under mounting pressure. His earlier certainty gave way to a series of increasingly urgent and frequent calls directed to me personally, calls that I documented scrupulously. During these conversations, Caleb implored for consulting support to stabilize the platform, even proposing substantial financial compensation as an inducement. I consistently declined, maintaining a professional boundary and redirecting all inquiries to Elliott. Each refusal was recorded in written correspondence to preserve a clear trail for legal proceedings. Meanwhile, Elliott coordinated with regulatory bodies, ensuring submissions were comprehensive and timely. We also prepared responses to anticipated defense strategies Phoenix's counsel might deploy, such as claims of organizational restructuring necessity or alleged performance issues. To preempt these narratives, I compiled performance evaluations, client feedback reports, and project success metrics, clearly demonstrating my sustained exemplary contributions and the operational risks of my sudden removal. As legal filings, regulatory investigations, and operational crises converged, the company's strategy unraveled. Caleb initiated tentative settlement overtures, seeking to mitigate escalating damages and reputational harm. Each offer was met with calm professionalism and a firm stance. Negotiations would proceed only through legal channels based on full recognition of contractual and regulatory violations. My posture remained measured, avoiding any emotional reactions or confrontational rhetoric, preserving credibility and legal leverage. The turmoil within Phoenix Technologies intensified as the junior team's inability to fully grasp and manage the platform's complexities became apparent. Client confidence waned, contract renewal talks stalled, and internal engineering morale suffered. These tangible consequences lent weight to our claims of negligence and breach of fiduciary duty, amplifying pressure on Phoenix's leadership to resolve the dispute. Throughout this phase, I maintained meticulous records of every interaction: legal documents, correspondence, client complaints, regulatory communications, and operational incident reports. This growing body of evidence formed a comprehensive dossier that mapped the direct cause and effect relationship between the company's contractual breaches and the ensuing operational fallout. By methodically coordinating legal action with regulatory engagement and operational monitoring, Elliott and I created a multifaceted challenge Phoenix Technologies could neither ignore nor easily resolve. The simultaneous escalation of lawsuits, investigations, and system failures applied increasing pressure on management and procurement, revealing the critical flaws in their cost-cutting approach. This was not a moment for impulsive moves or public spectacle. Instead, our strategy leveraged precision, documentation, and measured professional conduct, turning the company's short-sighted savings plan into a protracted, inescapable reckoning. The company found itself caught in a web of legal, financial, and operational consequences, all emerging from their initial decision to undervalue institutional knowledge and contractual commitments. In the silence between public announcements, the dispute reverberated through Phoenix's leadership ranks. The careful, strategic pressure we applied was beginning to fracture their unified front, yet the outcome remained unresolved, each side maneuvering cautiously, anticipating the next legal filings, regulatory findings, and operational developments. My role had shifted from dismissed engineer to the central figure in a complex professional contest that demanded patience, poise, and relentless documentation. The case was evolving rapidly, setting the stage for further escalations and critical decisions by Phoenix Technologies. My measured responses, supported by Elliott's legal acumen and the mounting evidence, were gradually converting corporate miscalculation into strategic leverage. The quiet storm gathering behind the scenes promised to reshape the professional landscape for all involved. Caleb Hunt's downfall unfolded with a remarkable swiftness that few inside Phoenix Technologies had anticipated. After the series of operational failures, legal actions, and regulatory probes intensified, the company's board and senior leadership could no longer ignore the magnitude of the mismanagement stemming from his cost-cutting campaign. The cumulative evidence of gross negligence, both in disregarding contractual obligations and in jeopardizing the platform's stability, left little room for defense. I learned through a confidential update from a trusted insider that Caleb had been formally terminated for gross negligence. The official statement cited failure to uphold fiduciary responsibilities, reckless disregard for contractual and operational protocols, and causing substantial financial and reputational damage to the company. It was a decisive rebuke of the approach that replaced 20 years of institutional knowledge with inexperienced juniors, leading to cascading failures and client dissatisfaction. Caleb's termination sent a clear message. The company recognized that his cost-cutting gamble had backfired catastrophically. Simultaneously, Marvin Dalton, the corporate counsel who had endorsed Caleb's plan without fully understanding its legal ramifications, faced an internal disciplinary review. His oversight in failing to flag the contractual breaches, especially ignoring severance, stock option rights, and non-compete implications, raised serious questions about his due diligence. The review scrutinized his involvement in approving the termination process and the inadequate legal vetting that allowed Phoenix to proceed with such a high-risk maneuver. While Marvin was not publicly dismissed, the disciplinary inquiry severely curtailed his influence within the company's legal affairs and damaged his professional reputation. Phoenix Technologies itself confronted a cascade of multi-million-dollar penalties and financial liabilities stemming from these missteps. The wrongful termination lawsuit I filed, backed by exhaustive documentation and supported by regulatory findings, exposed the company to potential damages exceeding $1 million just in direct claims. Additional fines arose from regulatory agencies overseeing labor practices and intellectual property compliance, cumulatively amounting to several $million. These penalties strained Phoenix's financial resources and forced immediate review of corporate governance and compliance mechanisms. The operational fallout was equally severe. Key clients, alarmed by repeated outages and degraded service quality, threatened contract cancellations and delayed renewals. The instability in the Phoenix platform's performance eroded trust in the company's ability to deliver critical infrastructure solutions, an erosion that reverberated across its market positioning. Emergency restructuring was mandated, involving costly retraining programs for existing staff and the re-engagement of external experts to stabilize the system. This restructuring diverted resources from growth initiatives and innovation pipelines, deepening the company's challenges. Media coverage soon picked up on the story, framing it as a cautionary tale of corporate mismanagement and the perils of undervaluing experienced professionals. Industry publications detailed the fallout from the wrongful termination scandal, highlighting the systemic negligence that Phoenix Technologies exhibited in sidelining a key architect of its flagship platform. These reports prompted conversations throughout tech circles about employee rights, contract enforcement, and the critical role of institutional knowledge in sustaining complex systems. Further revelations surfaced as additional employees came forward, disclosing similar terminations or cost-cutting actions that had compromised their roles and severance arrangements. This broader pattern of corporate abuse amplified scrutiny on Phoenix's human resources and procurement practices. Internal whistleblower reports triggered further regulatory investigations into company-wide employment policies, intensifying reputational risks and legal exposure. Adding to Caleb's personal and professional troubles, I learned through public court records and media coverage that his private life was unraveling concurrently. Divorce proceedings revealed financial judgments that compounded his instability, with courts awarding settlements favoring fiscal prudence over his claims. These personal difficulties, while separate from professional performance, further undermined his standing within the company and among industry peers. The intersection of private and public accountability underscored the gravity of his missteps. Phoenix Technologies' stock price reflected the turmoil, plummeting by approximately 35% in the weeks following these developments. Investors reacted to the combined weight of legal liabilities, client attrition, and governance failures. This erosion of market capitalization constrained the company's ability to invest in recovery efforts and placed additional pressure on leadership to address internal dysfunction. Legal fees associated with defending against my claims and managing regulatory responses quickly exceeded $1.2 million, drawing scrutiny from shareholders and board members alike. The company's decision to pursue aggressive cost-cutting, initially intended as a financial optimization, had ironically resulted in far greater expenses and operational disruption. Internal audits and post-mortem analyses highlighted the lack of cross-departmental communication and inadequate risk assessment that facilitated these avoidable outcomes. In the final professional reckoning within this phase, Caleb's procurement license came under threat of revocation. Regulatory bodies overseeing procurement standards initiated disciplinary proceedings based on evidence of misrepresentation, breach of fiduciary duty, and failure to adhere to ethical procurement protocols. This potential revocation not only jeopardized Caleb's career in procurement, but also served as a formal censure of his conduct throughout the Phoenix incident. Throughout these cascading consequences, I maintained a disciplined focus on my own professional integrity. I carefully tracked public disclosures, regulatory filings, and corporate announcements, cross-referencing them with the evidence Elliot and I had amassed. The unfolding situation validated our strategic approach. By leveraging documented breaches and operational realities, we compelled systemic accountability beyond mere financial restitution. The professional landscape within Phoenix Technologies had been fundamentally altered. The rapid succession of terminations, disciplinary actions, regulatory penalties, and client losses underscored the high cost of neglecting institutional knowledge and contractual safeguards. As the company faced the complex task of rebuilding trust internally and externally, the narrative shifted from cost-cutting expediency toward the essential value of experience, documentation, and lawful process adherence. While the company struggled with its recovery, I continued to prepare for the next phases of negotiation and settlement, mindful that the legal and operational fallout was far from resolved. The groundwork we laid for systematic justice had triggered a profound corporate reckoning, one that would require sustained diligence and professional poise to navigate effectively. The quiet storm was intensifying, and the stakes remained high. The court's judgment marked a pivotal moment in the unfolding professional saga. After months of meticulous documentation, legal filings, and regulatory scrutiny, the ruling awarded me $1.1 million in damages. This sum encompassed unpaid severance, recognition of my vested stock options valued at $450,000, and punitive damages designed to penalize Phoenix Technologies for their willful breaches. The court's decision clearly acknowledged the company's disregard for contractual obligations, the mishandling of intellectual property rights, and the operational risks I had systematically documented. This verdict was not simply a financial win. It was an affirmation of the professional principles I had upheld throughout: meticulous documentation, contractual fidelity, and strategic persistence. The severance component compensated for the abrupt termination without cause, and the denial of the protections explicitly spelled out in my employment agreement. Importantly, the award for stock option compensation recognized that equity is not a discretionary bonus but a legally binding commitment, especially when vested after years of dedicated service. In parallel, regulatory agencies imposed fines against Phoenix Technologies exceeding $3.4 million. These penalties stemmed from labor law violations, specifically the failure to honor severance pay and stock rights, as well as intellectual property compliance infractions. The regulatory review underscored that Phoenix had not only breached contracts, but also operated outside established legal boundaries concerning employee rights and proprietary assets. These fines served as a clear institutional rebuke and sent a cautionary signal to the broader industry about the consequences of neglecting such obligations. Caleb Hunt, whose cost-cutting mandate had triggered the entire fallout, faced criminal charges related to fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. Evidence presented during the trial demonstrated that he knowingly disregarded critical contractual protections and regulatory requirements to meet aggressive budget targets. His actions constituted a breach of trust and legal responsibility to the company and its stakeholders. These charges went beyond professional misconduct, highlighting the severity of his negligence and the personal legal exposure that follows such disregard for fiduciary standards. Industry bodies responded swiftly. Procurement professional associations and certification boards moved to blacklist Caleb from roles involving vendor and contract management. His reputation, once built on efficiency metrics and cost savings, was irreparably damaged by the exposure of these failings. This professional censure not only curtailed his career prospects, but also reinforced the broader message that ethical compliance and respect for contractual duties are non-negotiable in procurement leadership. Phoenix Technologies suffered lasting damage beyond the courtroom and regulatory apparatus. The company lost several key clients permanently, many of whom cited the operational instability and governance failures that accompanied my termination. These contract losses directly impacted Phoenix's market position and revenue streams, provoking a partial shutdown of some product lines and forcing a strategic retrenchment. The financial and reputational damage inflicted by the mishandling of my departure reverberated well beyond internal management circles. From my side, the court's ruling and regulatory outcomes opened new professional doors. I received multiple offers from industry leaders recognizing the value of my expertise and the integrity I maintained throughout the ordeal. These offers included significantly improved compensation packages and equity stakes, reflecting a market acknowledgement of my irreplaceable role in platform architecture and operational leadership. Additionally, the settlement granted me full intellectual property rights to the innovations I had developed within the Phoenix platform, a critical asset that further elevated my professional standing. The case quickly became a benchmark within employment law circles, cited in seminars and legal literature as a textbook example of how documented employees can enforce contractual rights and protect intellectual property through disciplined, strategic action. It also served as a warning to firms emphasizing short-term cost savings at the expense of institutional knowledge and employee protections. The legal principles and practical lessons extracted from this case influenced corporate policies and shaped practices in technology employment and procurement governance. While the financial awards and regulatory sanctions were significant, the broader professional impact was equally consequential. The outcome underscored the importance of maintaining comprehensive documentation, understanding contractual rights in detail, and exercising measured patience in the face of corporate adversity. The case demonstrated that systematic, evidence-based responses offer a robust pathway to justice, far more effective than emotional confrontation or reactive disputes. At this stage, the professional landscape had shifted considerably. The company's leadership was compelled to reassess its approach to employee relations, procurement strategies, and compliance frameworks. The ripple effects extended beyond a single individual's termination, influencing organizational culture and industry standards. My strategic response had transformed a personal setback into a catalyst for broader accountability and institutional reform. Despite the tangible victories, the situation remained dynamic. Negotiations on the enforcement of the court's judgment, regulatory compliance monitoring, and ongoing industry engagements meant that my professional journey was far from static. The adjustments within Phoenix Technologies and the scrutiny over procurement practices were unfolding gradually, requiring continued vigilance and strategic navigation. In reflecting on this phase, I recognized that the legal and regulatory affirmations were not just endpoints, but milestones, markers of a process built on sustained discipline, legal acumen, and professional integrity. The comprehensive case we constructed, supported by my detailed documentation and Elliot's legal expertise, had decisively challenged the flawed cost-cutting paradigm. The lessons embedded in this experience now serve as a foundation for my ongoing professional endeavors, advising firms on architecture, compliance, and contractual strategy. As the industry absorbed the ramifications, my role evolved from a wronged employee to a respected consultant and thought leader. The outcome validated the power of combining technical mastery with legal strategy, reinforcing that measured, informed responses can turn corporate betrayal into professional opportunity without sacrificing dignity or professionalism. The court's decision, regulatory sanctions, and industry repercussions collectively signaled a turning point, not a conclusion, inviting ongoing engagement with the complex interplay of employment rights, intellectual property, and operational stewardship in today's technology sector. Now I lead the engineering division at a well-established competitor, a role that came with a 30% salary increase and equity participation, reflecting both my proven expertise and the desire to secure long-term commitment. Managing a talented team of 15 engineers, I enjoy full autonomy over platform architecture decisions, development roadmaps, and resource allocation. This leadership position allows me to apply the lessons I learned from my experience at Phoenix Technologies, especially the critical importance of rigorous documentation, clear contractual frameworks, and strategic foresight in technology management. Beyond my primary role, I've developed a thriving consulting practice specializing in system architecture, intellectual property protection, and employment contract compliance for tech firms navigating complex workforce transitions. My approach is grounded in the principle that technical excellence must be paired with meticulous documentation and legal literacy to safeguard both innovation and careers. I advise clients on establishing comprehensive documentation protocols, negotiating enforceable contracts, and designing transition plans that minimize operational risk during personnel changes. The Phoenix episode has become a cornerstone case study in my consulting engagements, illustrating how strategic patience and professionalism can yield justice without antagonism. Reflecting on this journey, I recognize that the key to my success was maintaining emotional detachment and methodical discipline throughout the ordeal. Despite the initial shock and disappointment of being labeled overpaid and replaced, I resisted reactive anger or confrontational responses. Instead, I processed the situation analytically, reviewing contracts with precision, cataloging system dependencies, and gathering corroborating evidence. This calm professionalism allowed me to preserve credibility and build a comprehensive, legally sound case that leveraged every documented asset. Moreover, my experience underscored the profound value of contractual literacy. Understanding the specific severance terms, stock vesting schedules, intellectual property clauses, and non-compete conditions embedded in my employment agreement was indispensable. These contractual elements were not mere formalities. They were critical levers that protected my financial interests and professional reputation. I now advocate for engineers and executives alike to invest time in mastering these details, emphasizing that such knowledge empowers individuals to navigate corporate restructures strategically rather than passively. Technically, the ordeal reinforced the indispensable role of thorough documentation and secure system controls. The Phoenix platform's complexity was only manageable because I maintained detailed architecture blueprints, security protocols, and encrypted backups. These assets were not just operational tools, but strategic safeguards that underscored my irreplaceability and provided tangible evidence in legal and regulatory proceedings. I continue to champion these practices in my current engineering leadership and consulting work, stressing that systematic documentation is both a technical necessity and a professional shield. Looking back, the transformation of betrayal into opportunity was a testament to professional mastery, not just of code and systems, but of contracts, legal frameworks, and strategic patience. Justice was achieved not through emotion or spectacle, but through the disciplined application of expertise, evidence, and measured negotiation. This approach has shaped my professional identity, one defined by competence, integrity, and calm resolve amid adversity. Today, I am privileged to work in an environment that values these qualities and rewards sustained contribution with appropriate recognition. I lead teams empowered to innovate with autonomy and accountability, and I guide organizations to build resilient technical and legal foundations. The lessons from my former employer's missteps inform every decision I make, ensuring that neither I nor those I advise will ever be vulnerable to similar injustices. In essence, the Phoenix Technologies episode did not mark an end, but rather a professional renaissance, an evolution from sidelined engineer to influential leader and trusted consultant. It affirms the profound truth that in the intersection of technology and law mastery and patience are the strongest forms of justice,